You wrote one article called Gaps and Deficits. Then today you have written about Prime Minister's promising to build a new FBR as a response to disappointing revenue collection figures. And you call this an example of his government's growing helplessness before the massive dysfunctions that he promised he would fix with a magic bullet. And you also go on to say that of course, this promise is absurd because building a whole new institution from the ground up is almost as illogical an idea as financing a mega dam through public donations. Okay, fine. This is as far as the PTI government is concerned. But then there was a government before the PTI government. And when you talk about growing helplessness before the massive dysfunctions, clearly these dysfunctions haven't happened in the last 200 days. They've been there over the last 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or maybe 20 years.
That's right, Ejaz. And to take the example of the Federal Board of Revenue, the example that I took my departure from in today's article that you're mentioning, there have been multiple attempts to try and reform the structure of the FBR as well as the policy framework within which it operates. So we have two separate things: there's structural reform of the FBR, and then there is tax policy reform. So multiple attempts have been made, some really ambitious, far-reaching and deep-rooted ones, going back at least 20 years. And those with a memory will recall the tax administration reform program run by the World Bank during the Musharraf years. They will recall the reform GST, as it was called at the time, or the attempts of the PPP government to try and introduce a value-added tax. They will recall easily, I'm sure, the attempts of the PMLN government to promote documentation and a culture of tax compliance by imposing penalties on non-filers of tax returns and trying to provide incentives to those who do file their returns as a sort of a carrot and stick measure. So over 20 years, we have seen many different approaches, including in the earliest tax reform agenda that was floated, you might recall 20 years ago, it was called the Shahid Hussain report under World Bank consultancy, which practically envisaged reforming the FBR to the point where it would become unrecognizable in its present shape. The FBR and tax policy over the years as an economic journalist, that as I followed these developments, has proven resilient to all these attempts at reform. It has proven resilient to any deep-rooted change that would significantly alter the relationship between the tax authorities and the taxpayer. Some amount of change has come in. Some amount of automation, the technology is used today to a far greater extent than it was 20 years ago. But the revenue potential of this has not really materialized. So, for instance, 20 years ago, one of the biggest non-documented sectors of the economy was retail and wholesale trade, and today it remains retail and wholesale trade as the largest undocumented sector. So nobody has really been able to successfully bring this undocumented sector into the tax net.
Khurram, I remember you did some back of the